PSV were really good with their timing or their angles or the speed and power of their runs, and they created a few chances through their fullbacks. Bayern Munich, however, were trying to drop players down from the last line to create more spaces in the last line to actually go over the press. But when you think about that conceptually, if they manage to break through that and create the overload, which they do, he almost ends up running through in like a centre forward position. What happens to his marker? And that can be absolutely anything. That can be individual, that can be sort of relational with regards to different players working in different ways, structural, it can be the flow of a game, it can be mental, it can be physical. So we got to the point, to be honest, where combining the sort of phase data with the tracking data, our data and the opposition's data, we could almost, or we were working on predicting the physical load of matches. You're the future of our club for however many years, and our job is to maximise your skills and your abilities as a coach and everybody else around this table. Inside that was multiple match reports, multiple bits of supplementary information, but it was like 100 pages for every single game, and we were doing that every 3 or 4 days, European opponents. I think the main skill that probably gets developed with maturity and time is...
Hello and welcome back to the podcast, and today's guest is Paul Brand. So Paul is currently the Football Intelligence Lead at UEFA, having joined those guys at the back end of 2025. Before that, Paul was the Head of Performance Analysis at Manchester United, having spent over 12 years at the club, and before that he was the Head of Performance Analysis at Blackburn Rovers. So Paul is somebody that has been involved in analysis at the highest level for over 17 years, and obviously throughout his different roles he has worked with some of the best coaches, managers and players in the world. So in this conversation we learned a little bit more about Paul's background, but we actually dive a little bit deeper into some tactical topics within the game. So I figured if we've got someone like Paul on the show with his experience and knowledge, then why not try and learn a little bit along the way. So we speak about different tactical trends, we jump into things like man marking, how the game is changing, and also we are treated to a screen share from Paul where he actually breaks down a bit of a tactical intervention made by Hansi Flick and Barcelona in a recent Champions League game. So hopefully you can take as much from this conversation as I did. Okay, so before we bring in today's guest, I'm excited to say that this episode is sponsored by Smart Technologies, and more specifically the Smart Board Mini. Whether you are reviewing or breaking down tactical insights or communicating with players and coaches, the Smart Board Mini turns data and video into clear visual insights. It's a tool that is perfect for professional analysts and coaches, but more on that later. Let's get into today's episode. Paul, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Chris. How are you?
I'm not bad at all. I'm really pleased to have you on. I'm looking forward to getting into a few things. I've got loads of questions I want to ask you. Some questions obviously were put in by the viewers as well, so that's great to see. And I think you're also going to treat us to a little bit of a screen share as well later on, so very much looking forward to that. So what I will actually say as well, we're on episode 99 by the way, so we're nearly at that 100 mark, and I just want to make it known this episode is kind of long time coming, because I did actually try and get you on a few years back then. I was busy at United, so we finally got you on. So looking forward to picking your brains today, Paul. So for those that don't know who you are, I will pass it over to you just to give yourself a bit of a brief introduction, who you are and what you're currently doing and what you have been doing in football.
Yeah, so my name's Paul Brand. I've been an analyst for just over 17 years now. From a pretty remote part of Scotland, Forfar, northeast, just north of Dundee. So when I was younger, went to University of Aberdeen, Dundee, studied sports coaching and development. As part of that course, there was an analysis module that was a big moment really in terms of having that awareness that analysis is a thing and plays a prominent role in professional football. And to be honest, once I sort of saw the makeup of what that is, it fit really, really well with my skills and my drive. And I'm not a very academic person, and I realised that it was a space where you didn't necessarily have to have, academic qualifications to get in and make a difference. And from there, I sort of pursued the career. I had a really fortunate, sort of two fortunate breaks where we got asked to work part-time at Hibs Football Club on behalf of a company that were trying to produce tracking and event data live at Hibs. So this, as I say, this was 19 years ago. And as part of that, I managed to impress and make some good contacts. And then from that, a break came to join Blackburn Rovers as basically the second member of their first team analysis department whilst they were in the Premier League. So that gives you an idea as to where it was sort of almost 20 years ago, where there was still only really one or two analysts per Premier League clubs, which is obviously a completely different landscape to now. And then, I was like supporting the first team work at Blackburn Rovers. And after, I think it was 15 months or so, was fortunate to be promoted to head of department when I was still quite young. We managed to build a department. I was there for 4.5 years, and then was fortunate to be offered the sort of lead role at Manchester United. I held that position for just over 12 years, left at the end of October last year, and then was fortunate again to be offered a role with UEFA coming out of that part of my career. So now I've been working for UEFA just over 4 months as football intelligence lead.
Perfect. Well, that's very, very, very interesting. So I will say as well, there's a few links to some recent guests as well that we've had on here, Paul. So I will link below if anyone wants to check them out. So firstly, we've got, I think, moving back, we've got Carl on, who's the women's analyst at Man United, who I know I think you were still there at the time, and you were maybe part of that progress of the interview for Carl on. So I'll link that down below. And then also, obviously, Tom Green, who was analyst. You would have worked for many years with Tom. And I'm trying to think if there's any other kind of links we've got in there. But I'll link them.
Ewan Sharp as well as another example of somebody who came in as a sort of coach analyst with one of the coaching teams.
Yeah, definitely. So those will all be linked down below. But don't click off this one yet. Let's enjoy this episode first. So perfect. So let's get into the role at UEFA, Paul, because it's your job title is, what is it? Intelligence lead. So what can you just explain what you do, but also what the department is there for? What's the purpose of the team that you've got at UEFA?
Yeah, it's a very fancy title that they've given me for a start. So essentially, it's really, really strange because obviously 99% of analysts' departments are focused on winning football matches or winning matches in whatever sport that they compete in. But obviously within UEFA, we don't have sort of matches that we're aiming to win. We have a neutral perspective. Our whole thing is education and awareness, and using our competitions to shine a spotlight basically on the elite level of football to aid education. Now, mainly this is coach education and public education. UEFA have the coaching convention that runs through all of their sort of UEFA coaching badges. That there's a big part of that that's around reality-based learning. So we play a big part in sort of taking what is given to us in the Champions League, Europa League, Conference League, Women's Champions League, the Euros, also further down into the youth competitions in futsal. We are responsible for sort of taking the best practice and the elite examples from those competitions and giving that back to coaches, UEFA sort of level coaches, not just UEFA level coaches, but also youth coaches, grassroots coaches, and that can be through coaching events in individual countries, or that can be also through the articles that we'll discuss, where that's free for the public to access. And like I say as well, that's also sort of public education, and by public I mean sort of your grassroots coaches that aren't necessarily affiliated with UEFA, or even your football players,
Yeah, definitely. So, and in terms of the team itself, so obviously I know I've spoke to Jason as well that's in the team. Is it a small team? Is it just a few of you? And kind of how does it look basically as a team?
Yeah, it's we have a department of, analysts per se. We're sort of quite small actually. It's like 3 or 4 in terms of sort of full-time analysts. Yeah. But what we've got a lot of people in between that and around that are sort of affiliated to the analysis process. So Jason, quite humbly, will probably say he's not an analyst, but his main role is to support a lot of the work that we do, manage deadlines, manage delivery, tie everything together. We've got an independent telestrator. Again, in a club scene, your analysts double up as telestrators, but we've got an independent telestrator who has worked in professional broadcasting, for example. And when you see the quality of our telestration, that's quite clear. We've got Atla Rosselin's our manager, but he's also delivered for a lot of years on that. We've got writers that we work with, and we've also got kind of pro license level coaches and technical observers that we work with to kind of dip in and out of the work and manage the content and make sure it's of the highest level. So the makeup of the unit is a lot sort of different to a club setting, but we all sort of work together on different pieces at different times to bring it all together. And I think we're going to come to it, but the creation of the articles in particular is a really good representation of that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's good how you do feed in those technical observers as well. Like we're going to get onto one with with Erik ten Hag played a part in, obviously the Hansi Flick and stuff like that. So there's lots of people that are playing their own individual part. And you mentioned the telestrations. We're definitely going to come to that because, especially in the articles that I've seen as online, the telestrations are very good. Like, they're very clear on what they're trying to portray. So yeah, that's perfect. So in terms of then, do you have is there such thing as an average week for you, Paul? I know we're pretty much in the knockout phases of the Champions League as we're recording this. So can you kind of run us, because again, you messaged me a lot of the week and you're at Real Madrid, weren't you? So you do get around, you get into games and stuff. So what does an average week look like for you? Let's say this week. I know this is a one-off recording this, but you've got the games coming in the next couple of weeks. So what are you doing? What are you getting up to?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and that's one of the biggest changes in this role, in this environment, compared to the club scene. The club scene or international, obviously it's a bit different, but if I take club, coming from Manchester United, we'd have 50 to 60 matches a season, and you're governed by that schedule. You're more or less working off a basis of 2 matches a week.
Yeah.
You're kind of coming out of one match, going into another match, and it's that cycle. It is a lot different. We've got a lot more ad hoc sort of tasks and requests. That can be events in person, like coaching events. That can be online presentations, and my life now is based working from home with a lot of online meetings with the guys that I work with. But as you touched on, for my role in particular, delivering across the Champions League and Europa League since I've come in, sort of being activated, let's say, on these European weeks. So this week, we're recording this on a Monday. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to fly out to Switzerland to UEFA's headquarters, and I'll be sort of in our bunker for the next 2 days, next two nights, match nights, supporting the player of the match delivery with the Technical Observer, and working with the Technical Observer and a lot of the guys I mentioned earlier in order to create these articles. So I'll be on the ground in Switzerland, where we've got sort of very, very high quality feeds coming in, and we'll use that high quality footage with the articles. So I've kind of got like a European week and a non-European week. My non-European week's kind of based at home, and my European week is generally in Switzerland. But you mentioned 2 weeks ago we were really fortunate to be on the road in Madrid, where Atletico Madrid played Club Brugge on the Tuesday night. So we were in stadium for that, and then Real Madrid Benfica was the Wednesday night. So we went back to back. So that was a great experience, but obviously brings with it different challenges and a different environment in order to do the work.
Okay, so time for a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's video, which is the Smartboard Mini from Smart Technologies. Now, I know some analysts already do use this technology in their workflows, but for those that don't, it's definitely worth checking out. Essentially, it's a compact and interactive display, which in my opinion is great for enhancing the way you present to your team. As you know, I've been an analyst and I've spoke to many other analysts on this podcast, and a key part of the job is to ensure that your analysis and insights are delivered clearly and efficiently to the players and other coaches. The Smartboard Mini works seamlessly with both Mac and Windows devices, and it comes with a 27-inch 4K Ultra HD display and can also be purchased with a branded case. So if you are travelling to away games, for example, you can have your team crest on the actual travel case, which I think is pretty cool. So whether you're in the changing room, the coach's or analyst's office, or delivering online, the Smartboard Mini really can supercharge your presentations. I've left a link down in the description for more details, and you can also scan the QR code which is on screen right now. So thanks again to the guys at Smart Technologies for sponsoring this particular episode. Let's get back to it. No, definitely. So in terms of then deadlines, because you're in the bunker, and that just shows that it's not all glamorous as well, by the way.
There's no windows in there.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of the work that you're doing from this game week then, you mentioned when you're in a club setting, obviously you're working to the next fixture, the next, what's your deadline like? Are you wanting to still get the stuff out for this game week by the end of the game week, or how does it look deadline wise?
Yeah, so it's such a big deal. Like, in the club setting, there's obviously massive, ridiculously big pressure to be on time, because you're sort of keeping up with the coaching staff and you're making sure that everything's delivered at the right time to then be sort of dissected and then delivered into the players, and it's part of this ridiculously well-oiled machine. We have the same thing, but the end point is, especially with the articles, it's going online, it's going on UEFA.com, and I believe our articles are some of, if not the most clicked on articles that UEFA.com actually release. So the pressure to obviously have them delivered on time and of the highest quality is a really, really big deal. So, for example, this week we've got a Champions League game on a Tuesday and a Wednesday night, 2 feature matches. The we have two versions of articles that we release. So we've got what we call the commercial article, which is sponsored by FedEx. It's a really big deal, but it's a bit more high level. That gets released the next sort of lunchtime, the next afternoon after that game. So Wednesday lunchtime, we'll be releasing that commercial article from the night before. And in order to release that, we've got to work with the Technical Observer to decide on the best possible insights to include in that. We've also got to work with the telestrator to bring the clips to life, and obviously work with the writer to create the article. We will also deliver an insights piece from that, and that's sort of a much deeper level, kind of pro license level article that will then be released on the Friday. But whilst we're working on that, then in comes the kind of Wednesday night match night. Yeah. So we have to try and be done with all the content and that journey of that content, even though the clips aren't sort of finished in terms of the graphics, or the writer's not finished writing the article. From my side and the sort of analysis side and the Technical Observer side, we want to be wrapped up before that next match night, because then that cycle starts again. We've got another commercial article to release the next day, and then another insights article that usually gets released the Monday after, which is going to be like a preview piece for the next Champions League week. So there's a lot of juggling. I sort of, in my mind, treat it as project management, and I'm the sort of project manager where I'll contribute sort of my ideas and my analysis, but I'm very much bringing in the insights created and delivered from the Technical Observers, tying that in with the writer, tying that in with the telestrator. We're also working with a graphics company and working with data to also create images and graphics that get, that supplement the articles. So you can be basically having a conversation with 4 or 5 different entities at any given point in order to make sure that this article keeps moving on and everybody's got something to be working on in order to hit that deadline.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to kind of deep dive into one of the articles very, very shortly. And, it's interesting because that's what I wanted to see. Like, obviously, that's an article. It might take me 10 minutes to read that article and view a few clips, but there's obviously a lot of work that goes into it with all the different moving parts. So you referenced there UEFA.com in terms of the articles, but also there's more than that on there, like videos, the stats on there and stuff. So I just wanted to give that a shout out, and maybe you can expand on that in terms of what is actually available just for the general public, just to go on and see, all of this kind of good stuff that you are doing and learn from that, because it's a great learning material from what I can see.
Yeah, I mean, the main sort of 3 things that we contribute to is the commercial article, which I touched on, is the way I sort of differentiate them in my head is like if you're watching a match at the weekend and you've got the sort of halftime highlights, there'll be some telestration in there that's explaining what's happened. And it's usually like, oh, look at the curve on this ball, look at the quality of the finish, look at the technique, something like that. But it's quite short and sharp. So that commercial article is usually 2 or 3 clips for us.
Yeah.
And it's usually highlighting the sort of most eye-catching and attractive thing in the match. It's often the player of the match. It's often the qualities and the actions of the player of the match. Yeah. The insights piece is normally 2 or 3 topics. It often tells the story of a game, and it can be absolutely anything. I would liken that to the quality and the depth of like a Monday Night Football program, to be honest with you. And that's the kind of range where we're operating. And that can be absolutely anything. That can be individual. That can be sort of relational with regards to different players working in different ways. Structural. It can be the flow of a game. It can be mental. It can be physical. Whatever we, along with the Technical Observers, sort of understand as to be the best insights to take from that game to then share. That's what we'll work on. So they're the kind of 2 main things that are regular. But we also have the technical reports on there, which are a great read, to be honest. They get produced at the end of every major competition. They're all archived. They're all available to download. If you download them, you can also play the video within that PDF. So they play the telestrated videos. And that tells the story of the competition, the tournament. Goes into different teams that maybe weren't so prominent in the end of it, but had interesting things going on in the group stage, for example, the league phase. And that's another good, and that's got its own dedicated page as well.
Yeah, nice. So let's jump into that first one. So this one that I found pretty interesting. I think it would be, good to hear your perspective on it. Was one that you did around man marking, and I understand we'll get to kind of what's in at the bottom of it in terms of a session. But from what I see, Erik ten Hag was a part of this kind of project. So I'm just kind of interested to kind of learn around what goes into. You mentioned some of it already, but what goes into creating that article in terms of this one specifically, and if you can just expand on what that. And I will link it down below for people to just check it out as well. But what were the main themes and talking points from this particular article?
Yeah, so the first thing to note, which is where we're quite unique, and people maybe wouldn't have an understanding of this, is that when we go into a game, we don't have any preconceptions, or we've obviously got knowledge, but we don't allow that to skew what we're going to see. We very much go in with a completely blank canvas, sort of myself, the technical observer. We might sometimes also have a second technical observer working with us, either directly as part of that group or supplementary. But we go into the game with nothing that we're intending to look for. So we want the game to give us the content, essentially. And then that's our skill to be sort of open-minded enough and be aware of as many possible things going on at once, whilst in the moment, to be able to take that from the game. It's important to note that the technical observer for that game is also delivering the player of the match verdict. So it's quite a cool little job. They sit and analyse all the performances, and during the game, they're asking us for support on who they're thinking about picking. And we give video support and data support to help supplement their decisions. They have to then deliver that by full time, and then immediately you won't unsee it now. It's something that I knew went on, but now when I see it, it's like it's a military operation to get that trophy to the player of the match within minutes, get them on the pitch with the interview. But that's all down to the technical observer who's either in stadium or at home watching the game with our support. But whilst that's going on, we are starting to discuss what the game is and what it's given us. Yeah. This player did this that's really interesting, or look at this dynamic. What's the game looking like? So if I jump into that PSV Bayern match, myself and Eric are watching the game in isolation. I'm chatting to him through WhatsApp, basically, and we start discussing the game. So very, very early on in the game, we see that both teams are adopting a man-to-man defensive organisation, basically. So already we're like, right, okay, that's definitely the game. We can see it clearly when PSV's got the ball. We can see it clearly when Bayern's got the ball. They're both playing a sort of a variation of a back four. So then you're trying to understand, are there any structural, tactical advantages from this? Yes or no? Now, as it went on, the answer was basically no. So then we're saying, okay, what are both teams going to be able to do to exploit the other? So it's like you've got, what are we looking for from an organised state? Then you've obviously got the dynamics in transition, which features in the article as a spoiler alert. You've got the transitional aspects, and of course you've got set plays. Now, as the game transpired, the set plays didn't give us too much, but what both teams did in organisation to disorganise their opponent and create problems was really interesting, and so were the transitions in the match. And obviously we're discussing this as the match goes on. So basically what happened was we saw first half especially, PSV were excellent at attacking with their fullbacks from deep. And it was the responsibility of their wingers, who were Luis Diaz on the left, and I think it was Lennart Carl on the right, if I'm not mistaken. Their responsibilities were to track the fullbacks, the attacking fullbacks, and PSV were really good with their timing or their angles or the speed and power of their runs, and they created a few chances through their fullbacks, which we've used as a topic in the end point of this article. Bayern Munich, however, were trying to drop players down from the last line to create more spaces in the last line to actually go over the press and sort of use sort of verticality to exploit the man marking. Two completely different approaches. And then we also saw 2 out of the 3 goals in the game came from transitional moments where the man marking was not appropriate, let's say, and either team took advantage of that. So I hope that all sort of makes sense. It's then our job to bring that all together in the form of an article in terms of, okay, which clips are we going to use? How are we going to display the telestration in a way that's most effective? And that is also using different angles to show different concepts, different bits of telestration, different words, quotes, data across the video. And what order is the article going to be written in terms of the topics? That's where we're working with the writer to use their expertise. And then finally, what makes UEFA's content unique, I believe, to sort of any other content that's online really, is our access to the technical observers, these elite level world-class coaches that take the topic and then add more flesh to it in a more conceptual, neutral sense. So in the case of this article, Eric thought it was particularly interesting how Bayern Munich used their verticality to exploit the man marking. And he has a drill for this. And it's a really, really eye-catching drill. You'll see it on the article where basically only the central column of the pitch is used. So it's extremely narrow, but there's two different ways to score points in the game. And basically, I asked Eric to give us that drill as a concept with the rules. We went to our graphics company. They made it look very, very attractive. And then we bring it back to the article, working with the writer to explain that. And it's basically a world-class coaching resource that's available, and it's created organically from what that game gave us. I hope that sort of wraps everything up quite nicely.
That was very useful. So one thing you said right at the start there, Paul, was you kind of approach the game with no an open mind in terms of, I think obviously that's quite relevant because you being not in the club setting, you weren't with the Bayern Munich team in the run up to that game, so it is a case of, okay, let's see what they've been working on and then kind of deal with what you're seeing basically at that point. So so in terms, like I said, I'm going to link that down below, but in terms of then when teams are playing kind of this man marking strategy, when they're doing that, obviously you mentioned that it kind of leads to lots of kind of transitions and stuff like that. So how do analysts and coaches kind of identify the specific moments in that the structure is most vulnerable basically on that transition? Because again, there's obviously different levels of man marking. People might have seen it where we just have one or two players that you're just only one player is set to man mark, but in this case there were some clips where it does seem like everyone had a job to do. Just on that transitions and how club teams are then vulnerable as a result of doing this kind of man marking style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the best example for me in the whole article is that in the Bayern Munich opening goal, we see a moment where PSV's left back intercepts the ball sort of centrally in the pitch. And in that split-second moment, I believe that's on a attacking transition for them. I think they regain the ball in that moment. You then see Lennart Karl, who's his direct opponent, trying to come inside to get direct pressure on him. And in that moment, Bayern Munich are now trying to establish their individual man-to-man matchups. The PSV left-back immediately basically dribbles and drives through the centre of the Bayern Munich team. So we see in the second half an extension of what we saw predominantly in the first half, where PSV are using their fullbacks to sort of penetrate and exploit and try and create. But when you think about that conceptually, if they manage to break through that and create the overload, which they do, he almost ends up running through in like a centre forward position. What happens to his marker? His marker's kind of left behind. He is trying to get back, but there becomes a point where the left back runs through the midfield of Bayern Munich, and it's kind of no longer Lennart Karl's responsibility to sort of deal with that. If PSV score from that, you're going, oh wow, look, we've just seen the best example of the fullback creating. However, and this is the micro details, especially at the highest level, and obviously I've been, to your question, I do have a lot of experience in understanding these moments of the game and the things that separate games.
Yeah.
I know from living in that space that the PSV coaching staff would have been fully aware, and they would have had a plan for what happens if they project their fullbacks to try and create an overload and try and create problems for Bayern. What happens to the balance behind that? But this moment is so extreme and so unique that there's no accountability for Karl. And when you see the clip, he's wide open in loads of space on that transition, and the left back's really high. Then Karl's in space, and then he combines with Musiala to score the goal. So what happened at half-time in that game was I had a call with Erik ten Hag and the writer, and we were discussing the first half so far, and we were saying, this is the game, this is what's interesting. And we proposed, like, well, what happened? We're seeing PSV's fullbacks running off the wingers. What happens if they lose the ball? The wingers are then in space, and that's something that they hadn't essentially accounted for, or they didn't want to have to deal with too often in the game. And then all of a sudden it becomes the sort of the breakthrough moment of the game for Bayern Munich. Again, coming back to your question, it is experience basically, and understanding that these are micro details in the game that are very, very important.
Yeah, I think that also shows why, and the level of importance that the telestrations play as well. So again, I'm watching this, I'm by no means an elite analyst. Like, I've been an analyst years ago, and I like football more as a fan these days. But some of these things I'm watching, thinking, actually, I maybe noticed that, but I didn't notice that, and then that led to that. And so it's very small details, and the telestrations really do help to bring them to life and understand what is actually going on in the bigger picture rather than just what's in certain areas of the pitch. So yeah, really, really useful. So you referenced said that the article comes with a bit of a session kind of design from Eric in terms of that verticality. So that leads to a question that I want to ask you in terms of how. And you can also refer this back to your time in the club setting as well, Paul, at United or Blackburn, in terms of how an idea goes from the analyst, you on the laptop or maybe reviewing it with a coach, to actually on the pitch getting delivered to the players. So yeah, in terms of maybe you're watching your next opponent, you're seeing something, and that needs to then be delivered session-wise. Is it a case of, because we're seeing, again, I'm kind of jumping between questions here, but we're seeing like the rise of like the coach analyst positions and stuff like that. So I'm just curious to ask how you see something on video as the analyst and how that then portrays to the actual grass and pitch in the lead up to a game.
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer for me is that the responsibility to create the drill or the concept of the session for me is not with us as analysts. I believe that our job stops, to say, where we deliver the information and the insights. In my experience, because at Manchester United especially, we've had such a large coaching staff, there are so many world-class practitioners then in that space that then can go, okay, well, that's what the game's going to give us. This is what I'm thinking about our strategy. This is who I'm thinking about for our team selection. Therefore, should I or could I create a drill for this part of this training session that will work on that to be able to create that advantage in this match? The way that would work typically, or best in my opinion, is that we deliver, we're obviously analysing all those matches and we build up a very, very good idea of something. What I would say is the experience and quality you have as an analyst is important in that moment, because you need, or you want, the coach to be able to trust your opinion on what you're seeing.
Yeah.
That, to be honest, it only comes with work and time. And I look back on my own career and I don't believe I was probably in that point to be fully trusted, let's say, in terms of delivering surefire insights, possibly for 6 or 7 years, honestly, to the point when I reflect. But that's through your own experience and building relationships with coaches letting you into their world as well, because you only get that when you're exposed to what goes into creating these drills and sessions and ideas. But really, you need to deliver something that's substantial and accurate. And then they'll usually come back to you and say, well, what are the variations on this? Does it always look like this? Or does it change when this player plays or whatever? And then that's where you either investigate or you've got an immediate answer for that. And then they usually go away and sort of deliver that session. In my experience, that's probably the best way it works, because they're the coaches. You want them as a group to have the best understanding possible of, let's say, the opponent. But this can also be about your own performances or your own individuals or your own units or whatever it might be. But the job, to be fair, doesn't actually stop there, because often the way that that's worked on in training, we'll then take that footage, and because we've got an idea of the concept from all the way from the opposition analysis into the training, you've still got a day or two usually to then sort of use that content to tweak maybe things that happened in training to prepare the team for the match.
Yeah.
So taking that video, analysing that, possibly adding telestration to that, guidance, etc., working with the coaching staff to finish that journey is really, really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to ask you about kind of tactical trends that we see, Paul, over time, and how things maybe change and come in circles. Like many people obviously will be aware of the impact, for example, like Pep Guardiola's had on the Premier League when he came, and many teams are now playing a similar style. But obviously you've got exposure to different countries as well. You're watching teams elite in different countries. So firstly, do you see is there like clear league identities for you in terms of like the German league, the Spanish league, Italian league, and do they tend to play different when they're playing in Europe as opposed to their domestic league, for example? And just in terms of just tactical trends and how it maybe differs between the different regions, really.
I can use some experience, obviously, from UEFA so far, having more of an eye across more Champions League and Europa League football at the moment. But also, obviously, you get a great exposure when you're playing in Europe, because you're analysing those opponents in European competition and in their domestic leagues.
Yeah.
I think in terms of the smaller nations, the level of football, obviously, that that these teams are exposed to on the European stage is a difference. However, I do think most teams will deploy generally the same sort of style, and usually the teams, especially in the Champions League, are fairly prominent or even dominant in their domestic leagues as well. Yeah. So I don't think that differs too much. I think you do feel a style difference still in Europe, but I also don't think it'll across the different leagues. But I also don't think that that's maybe as strong as it probably was. And my guess would be that because European football's almost become a bit more like cross-pollinated now with Spanish, German, French, Italian coaches coming to the Premier League. You even see Vincent Kompany, for example, at Bayern. Yeah. You've had different nationalities in charge of Barcelona, Real Madrid, and obviously that's now filtering down. For me, when you start getting that, I think that just erodes the sort of the league identity that probably was a bit more prevalent 20, 30 years ago. But you do still feel it. I do still think that, traditional Spanish football, you get a very expansive set up from teams, often double width with kind of low fullbacks and high wingers, making the pitch as big as possible. I think Italian teams do still have a thing where the defensive organisation and the comfort of defending in a block and being very physical defensively is still a thing. I think the English game's completely diverse now, and I think probably the biggest development now is the flexibility between the teams, the ability to flick into man-to-man marking or come back to zonal, or even we see it in different phases of the game now, and that's where it's at. I don't think there's much league identity displayed anymore, to be honest with you.
Okay, so a quick interruption for anybody with an interest in video analysis. So I did mention at the start of this video that this episode is sponsored by Imply Online. So I wanted to spend just 1 minute going over exactly what that actually is and why it might be useful to you today. Okay, so Imply Online is a cloud-based video analysis software, but unlike other analysis software, it's not going to cost you an absolute fortune. So prices start from as little as £10 per month, and that's not including the discount code that I've put in the video description down below, along with a link to take you to the website to find out more information. But as a really quick overview, it will allow you to basically break down your match or training video. So if you are an analyst, a coach, or a scout, and you're wanting to do more video analysis, then Imply Online would be a great option for you to check out. So not only can you tag the videos with various different button types, so a tag button, a label, or even a start-stop button, you can then add a bit more detail and depth to the clips themselves. So that includes adding comments. You can even add voice notes and also do drawings or telestrates over your clips to make them more interactive. As well as that, you've got video playlists, which can be a great way to download clips to store and share them offline, but also store databases of clips in terms of maybe best practice clips, or if you're a scout, for example, you might have a playlist for a particular player that you are monitoring. So there's a whole lot more to it, but like I said, you can click the link in the video description to find out more detail. So that's it for the interruption. So let's get back to the episode. That is interesting. I suppose another interesting kind of point on that is the teams that are maybe strong in their domestic league, like they may be, the best team in the league, but then when they come to the Europe, they're more of seen as a weaker or middling team. So they will have to, rather than have a lot of the ball, they might then be more of a defensive team when they're playing these big clubs. So I suppose they've got to adapt to that, and that would be a difference from their domestic style to their European style potentially.
Yeah. The best example at the moment is probably Bodo Glimt. I've seen a lot of Bodo in the last couple of months, and their manager's been a great example of being aware of the standards, not just in terms of kind of wanting to be the best Norwegian team, but what it takes to compete in Europe. And he said continuously, they're on a run of 4 wins against City, Atletico Madrid, and then back-to-back against Inter. Yeah. He's basically said, before and after all of those games, we can't just defend low and be passive. Even though we've got certain threats, we need to be aggressive. We want to be on the front foot. We've also got our identity with the ball. We need to believe. We need to use our own physicality and our own mental strengths to compete. And maybe again, we wouldn't have seen that such confidence and such awareness of what the level is, perhaps so many years ago. But I think now we're exposed to so much kind of that elite level content, which we're probably contributing to in our own space. I think it's fascinating to see how these teams do it. And as I say, anyone who's not watched Bodo Glimt, they should watch them, because they carry a threat in all all of the open play parts of the game for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing I want to ask you now, Paul, is around two things which we've touched on. One of them definitely in terms of the telestrations, but also tracking data as well. So two things: telestrations, tracking data, which over the last 15, 20 years have obviously come along a long way, and probably weren't actually around right at the start, or not into the extent they are now. So telestrations first. We've obviously mentioned that you've got them on the articles. I think the articles do them really well. Obviously, you mentioned you have a professional that does that, so that's clear to see. And it's so good that it's, as a fan or someone that's watching it, I know exactly what that telestration is wanting me to take from that particular clip, for example. And I think that's where some people may get it wrong, and they might kind of go a bit over the top with the telestration. So how do you find that balance in terms of making sure? Because again, you may not do them now, but I'm sure you would have. You were kind of instructing where they go, and you did them at United, for example. So getting that balance right in terms of ensuring that what you're actually including is going to make a difference to a player, to a coach, etc., and not, diluting the actual message.
Yeah, anyone who's worked with me, including you're an illustrator now, would probably say I'm a bit of a control freak with this stuff, and I was when I was doing it myself as well. But that is because when that work is in your hands and you're responsible for that, in terms of getting that point delivered appropriately to whatever that target audience is, there's nothing more important really. So, I mean, from my experience in the club world, your target is the players. Now, you always have an understanding as to how they interpret that video, because you're in the team meetings with the coaching staff who deliver those clips, and you understand how they communicate. You understand that sometimes by putting a spotlight on a clip, that will prompt a certain coach to then sort of focus, and you develop that sort of hidden understanding. Sometimes the coaches aren't even aware of that you're prompting them through understanding how they want to present or what the players need. I think for the players, my mindset on behalf of the department at United was always, let's cater for the players who've got the worst understanding of English, basically.
Yeah.
And assume that they can't understand what the coach is saying, which isn't the case. I will add that disclaimer. I don't want any Man United fans saying, "Oh, that's the reason." No, I think that for the target of the players, it's like, let's make this video understandable through the telestration for the players. Now, we are, first of all, though, governed by the coaching staff. The coaching staff may say, I don't want too much telestration, or I want as much as possible. So that's the first kind of gateway, let's say. But then it's making it as clear as possible. I'm quite a big fan, for example, on a clip, of using distinguishing markers for positions and for player names as much as possible, because I just think you never know in the match where a player relies on seeing that player's number or that name on the back of a shirt for them to remember back to a clip. There's just no harm in it. So that you're designing these clips with the players in mind, and sometimes the wishes of the coaching staff. For the UEFA content, again, the distinction between the two articles, the commercial one is sort of aimed at fans. So you're making it extremely attractive. You're avoiding too much sort of tactical analysis. It's a lot more individual. It's a lot more explaining how something's happened in a basic sense. Whereas then the insights one, I always position myself that it's a pro license coach that's reading this, and I want the smartest of pro license coaches to still find this insightful. Therefore, using the telestration to show, you'll see that we use a lot of moving the players before something happens in order to display a space that's going to come, or highlighting areas or relationships that then mean that something else happens. It's sort of prompting that in the video before it actually plays out, so that they have an understanding before the video then comes. And I think that's also a powerful one for the players in a team meeting as well.
Yeah, I think some people just get a bit carried away. The software is obviously great these days, and just because it gives you the option to do all of these things, you don't have to put everything on the clip itself. So perfect. So tracking data now then, Paul, I don't know if it's something that you use extensively yourself, but the kind of growth of tracking data and the metrics that come with that, in terms of, I suppose, we're able as analysts and coaches ask questions now that probably weren't be able to be answered before tracking data, if you know what I mean, in terms of positioning and kind of pressing triggers and all that sort of stuff. So if you can just again, I don't know your experience with tracking data, Paul, but if you can just riff a little bit on the emergence of that and how it's used more, and kind of the answers that we were able to get with tracking data that we couldn't get 20, 25 years ago when it wasn't around, really?
Linking back to Tom's episode with you, Tom anecdotally mentioned the use of tracking data combined with other data that we used in order to prepare for. It was we used it all the time, but the anecdote he used was in preparation for the FA Cup final in 2024. And I'm not an expert on tracking data. We've got, very, very skilled analysts, or we had, at Manchester United, we had the sports science department would sort of take care of understanding that data, feeding that back, interpreting it. Where we were at, though, was we were doing a good job of contextualizing that data. And for me, it was absolutely everything. I really dislike all data, but especially tracking data when it's not used in context.
Yeah.
And in my world, working with coaches, it's understanding, one, what tracking data means in different contexts of the game in relation to how the coaches think and act. And what I mean by that is we had a strong sort of game framework that withstood a succession of managers and coaches, where the different phases of the game were analysed and worked on, whether it's our own game or the opposition, but also that was that transcended into training. So for me, one part was, well, why don't we try and isolate the tracking data in those specific moments of the match to understand the team demands and understand the sort of individual demands, and we can then work backwards to understand if a player has done enough or too much, or what the game may give us. We got to the point, to be honest, where combining the sort of phase data with the tracking data, our data and the opposition's data, we could almost, or we were working on predicting the physical load of matches. Now you can predict the physical load of training sessions because designing that session's in your control. But we were sort of working on the idea of, well, we think we're going to be playing this type of match against Chelsea at the weekend, and we expect attacking organisation to look like this, attacking transitions to look like this, and the volume of them, and so on and so on. And that's a really interesting concept for me. And also whether or not you want to use that to your benefit to tweak how the game's going to go, if that makes sense. Second of all was combining tracking data with event data and other sources of data in order to create information and insights. And the one that I mentioned with Tom was, in preparation for the FA Cup final in 2024, we had an idea of how we wanted to play and specifically defend in that game. And we used a season-long, well, seasons, let's say, but a season-long library of data and information that we had created as a department in order to identify the most relevant content against Manchester City that gave us the best information as to how a certain strategic plan would play out. Yeah. And what I mean by that was we basically picked a match from the middle of the season, almost out of obscurity, that our data led us to, that provided us a really interesting kind of example of what this game would look like if we deployed it, and also then the sort of the pros and cons and the potential fail points in that plan. And this was actually a match against Burnley in January, I think it was, 2024. And we took that game plan. I think Vincent Kompany was there at the time. We took that game plan, tweaked it, and implemented that. And it had a major impact on the success in that cup final. The data that went into that was highly contextual. It was looking at what Burnley did in certain phases of the game, and having that reference quickly allowed us during a coach analyst meeting to pull up that match and start watching those specific clips immediately. Without that data, we may never have landed on the best quality footage to then project the game plan through the rest of the week in preparation for the players. We may not have affected the training sessions in the same way, and we may not have been able to appraise what that was going to look like in the same way without that ability to get to that as quickly as we did.
Yeah. Really interesting, really interesting. So what we'll do now, Paul, is, I know you've got that screen, but before we do that, there's a couple of questions that were sent in. So firstly, thanks to anyone that did send a question in. We've done some already in the conversation because I had them down anyway, but there's just a couple here, Paul, if we can. So I think this is from, I've not read the name, I think this is maybe from Jack. So Jack, if this is yours, thanks for the question. So in your opinion, Paul, what separates elite tactical analysis from what we might consider good analysis at a professional level, particularly in terms of the detail, clarity and impact on decision making with top coaches?
I think the main thing probably that separates it is the big difference between observing something and observing something with a view to it then creating an actionable insight, something that can be implemented. I think that's the line, to be honest with you. I think when you're starting out, when you're growing up, when you're younger, you probably have the ability to analyze why something's happened, why something was good or bad or dangerous or whatever. I think the main skill that probably gets developed with maturity and time is understanding that not everything that's interesting is relevant or applicable, but also understanding the things that are interesting and implementable in relation to your team, your players, your strategy, your formation, your coaching staff. You know, I could look at a game, I could look at a random game of Arsenal and say, wow, this team defended incredibly against them in a 4-3-3 zonal block. But if I know that our base is 5-4-1 and man-to-man, there's no point in me taking that to the coaching staff, because, to be honest, they're going to look at you and go, do you not understand your role? Do you not understand how you're supposed to support us? And I think that's probably the main distinction. There's loads of different nuances and stuff, but I think most experienced analysts will know once they've crossed that line of playing a part in what is then implementable, and you decide to filter your sort of observations in a certain way, that you'll often leave out the stuff that's very, very good but not implementable, or relevant.
Definitely. So a follow-on question from that then, Paul, is, so how do you balance data-led insights with tactical context when working at the highest level, especially in situations where the numbers may challenge a coach's perception of the game, for example? Maybe they've not seen the data, but you have, and you're saying, well, actually, might not be as much, exactly what you're thinking, because you might want to take a look at this kind of thing. So, yeah, if you can riff on that.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing probably is you have to make sure that data is solid, first of all, because it's an extremely precarious position to be in, where you present data and it doesn't withstand the interrogation of the coaches. The acid test for that is whatever that data point is. Does the full video, if it's a data point of 70, for example, do all 70 or the majority of those 70 clips back up the conversation? And what I mean by that is, let's say we have, I don't know, turnovers, and you go to the coach and say, our security on the ball must have been shocking at the weekend because we made 45 turnovers and our season average is 25. You automatically build a picture in your head that you've got comfortable possession and that you're giving the ball away in a sloppy way.
Yeah.
The acid test is then watching those 45 and is that what is presented to you? And too often, and I'm still learning on this, I think every analyst has experienced this, too often you'll start watching them clips and you see turnovers within set plays, you see turnovers in second ball moments because the opposition are going long and direct, and these are not things that sort of fit that narrative, if that makes sense. And at that point, you've then got to make a decision as to whether or not you carry on with it and you sort of filter in that context or not. And to be honest, it comes back to context again, Chris, where any data point that you're using has to withstand the sort of subjective coaching environment in which it should then be implemented. And that comes back to my last question, is if you're conveying a specific data point and you think it's extremely interesting and extremely important, well, the end point of conveying that information should be change or reinforcement to keep doing something. But it should be that significant. If it's not that significant, you then run the risk that it's a bit frivolous, it's not that interesting, or possibly worse, misleading. And then that's when I use the term dangerous. that you end up in this weird situation where a coach is following this thread and you think, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or it's lost its context, and you end up either backing it or backtracking, and you lose credibility and stuff. So always check that the data withstands the coaching environment, because without that context, it's usually not good enough.
Yeah, definitely. Like as well, you said there, obviously you're 17, 20 years, whatever it is in the game, you're obviously still learning at this point. So I think that's just testament to analysts that are earlier on in the career. You don't just get to a point where you've cracked it. You're always going to be learning and picking up new things. So I suppose let's get into, Paul, you mentioned the screen share you've got. So if you can share that and just kind of give us a bit of an explanation of what it is. And
No problem. So I just wanted to share this as a snippet really of the type of work that we do and the insights that we do gather. This is content taken from an article we did a couple of months ago regarding in-game changes, and this was actually a multi-match piece. So usually we're delivering commercial and insights articles on one specific featured match that week, but sometimes as a preview to the next sort of Champions League week, we'll create this multi-game article content. And in this particular article, we had sort of 3 different matches that we covered. I believe it was an Arsenal change, a Barcelona change, and a Juventus change. I'm going to just deliver what the Barcelona change was. So in this game, I'll wait for the telestration to come up. The tactical situation that we had was Barcelona basically playing in a sort of a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-1-3. Balde, the left back, was tasked with playing high on the left to create this kind of 3-2-4-1 structure, or 3-2-5 balance. Rafinha from the left was playing inside. The number 10, I always forget if it was Lopez or Torres, but the number 10 was playing to the right-hand side. We had Lamine Yamal as a right winger holding his width, and Lewandowski through the middle, with sort of 2 sixes in this moment. The interesting thing, though, was how Frankfurt set up and how they tried to defend against them. And this was a perfect example of coming into this game fresh, not knowing what was going to come out of it. Frankfurt were defending. They played a sort of a 4-2-1-3, also a 4-2-3-1, but they were defending in a 4-4-2, and you wouldn't be able to tell it from this image here. Basically, we've got this player here as the right back, right centre back, left centre back, left back. This is the left 6. This is the right 6. This is the right winger. This is Götze, the 10. This is the striker, and this is the left winger. But very quickly, you see this shape transform into almost what can be described as a 6 and a 4, basically. And this was Frankfurt's way of defending and blocking Barcelona in this game. So you've got quite a clear sort of 6v5 up here and a sort of 4v5, let's say, at the front. But what they were trying to do was have an independent reference point for all of the forwards on the last line. So the left back was defending really wide to be tight to Yamal. You can see the reference points here, and crucially a 2v1 in the middle against Lewandowski. They then also deployed Götze and the sort of right central midfielder against the 2 sixes of Barcelona, and that gave a bit of freedom at the back for Barcelona, but that was essentially the only freedom they were giving them. I'll just let the clip run. You can see when players are moving, you can see the Frankfurt players moving in accordance. There is how we've highlighted that sort of 6v5. So the big question as we're watching this is, well, what are Barcelona going to do to exploit this? Or are they going to be able to exploit it? And in the first half, we see the defensive organisation of Frankfurt come to the most perfect conclusion, where you've got this kind of freedom at the back from Barcelona, but as soon as the ball went wide to Yamal, who's obviously one of Barcelona's most dangerous players, because of the distance between the left back and Yamal, he's able to get immediate pressure. You've then also got a 2v1 where the left winger, has dropped to create a 2v1. They're not worried about Koundé at this point because Yamal's the bigger threat. And this aggressive pressure to the side, they regain. And not only that, they break out of the pressure, dribble through midfield, and perfectly execute the counter-attack to go 1-0 up the Camp Nou. And it was an amazing example, first of all, first half of a sort of defensive organisation implemented by Frankfurt. This is a graphic that we produced for the article, just summarising that. So I don't need to go through it again, but you can see that sort of allocation. These were the average positions when sort of defending medium to low in the game. And we often use references from the players or from the coaching staff in that particular match to either suggest insights that we should look into or to back up what we're seeing. And we see this quote from Pedri, self-explanatory. And post-match, we see this quote from Hansi Flick that we needed more width, we needed Rashford to drag them to the goal line and change their shape. And if you were objectively analysing the first half, you would say, well, Barcelona need to do something either through some sort of like relational aspect, like give and go, swapping positions, more fluidity, or they need to fundamentally change something structurally to change what Frankfurt clearly set up to do. And that's what we saw. And for me, this was like an absolutely world-class intervention from Barcelona and Hansi Flick and his staff, which we'll come to. Basically, what they did was they took off Lopez at half-time and brought Rashford on. So Rashford then occupied the left wing as a kind of width-holding left winger, let's say. And Balde now dropped to play more behind the ball. So Balde and Koundé as like deeper fullbacks, Yamal and Rashford holding the width. And now the balance in midfield changed where Pedri played a little bit higher as like an 8 on the left, Rafinha is like an 8-10 on the right, and Garcia. And what that did was, because of the individual reference points, given that Frankfurt's right winger's reference point was Balde, it meant that he was now no longer defending where he was defending first half because Balde wasn't there. So it's creating more space on the last line. Also because they didn't play with a high 10 or a 10 as high or as fixed in this position, the 15 was now no longer blocking this space. And you can see his sort of average position was a little bit higher in this half. So what Barcelona had realised was, one, in order to create more threat, we're probably better playing with another winger. But two, we actually need to put less bodies on the last line than more bodies, which is often a kind of reverse as to what you would sort of think as a fan or even some coaches or analysts. And the result was this in the second half. And again, you talk about the sort of perfect implementation. There we see the difference. So now Barcelona still have width on the left, but it's not being blocked by this right winger who's only taken his position off Balde. You now have it that when Rafinha drops in here, it's creating more space on the last line. We have Pedri drifting high at the start of this clip. And obviously when the 8s went high, the midfielders for Frankfurt were following them. But when they dropped, they weren't. Now, in the first half, we also saw that because the left winger was often tasked with doubling up on Yamal, Koundé was often free. And Barcelona tried to find him, but because it was so blocked in this channel, they didn't quite find the right conditions to find him. But if you keep an eye on Koundé in this clip, we then see that he's sort of toying with that position. So we clearly show here that now on the last line, it's a 4v3 rather than a 6v5 it was. Koundé now threatening inside. And we start to see that if Koundé attacks now, there's not a direct reference point for him. And Barcelona understood this in what they observed during the first half with Frankfurt's defensive organisation. The ball's going to then come over to the left-hand side. Koundé again receiving the ball in space at this moment. But now when the ball comes to the left-hand side, it comes to Rashford. And we now see that it's now 2v2. In the first half, when Balde was receiving the ball here, he was up against this player and the right back was inside and tight to the next player. But now we can see the difference that's made. Balde attacking from deep has completely changed the conditions. And then, crucially, when we look at the back line, because Barcelona knew that the left back from Frankfurt was defending against Yamal, and we saw examples where this gap between the left centre-back and the left back was very wide in the first half, albeit it was blocked by this player. You can literally see at this pause point that this player is only concerned about defending Rafinha here, and that actually there's no direct, clear reference point to defend Koundé if he makes this late run into the box. And if we watch the execution here, bang, right in the middle of that gap between the left centre-back and the left-back. So not only was that a structural change, it was timing, it was the positions of the full-backs, and Balde's involved in that clip, even though he doesn't touch the ball. And you see that intervention delivered to absolute perfection. And for me, this was one of the best examples I've ever seen of football at this level, which, with respect, your fan wouldn't pick up on necessarily in terms of the details that's gone into that. Within the article, that gave us a great coaching reflection, which this time we used from Hansi Flick, where he said, we showed the team what we wanted, what space we needed, and my team always know what to do, and they do it. Congratulations to my whole staff, my fellow coaches and my analysts did a great job. And it's a great full circle moment, to be honest, talking about the role of the analyst in this podcast as well, where there's nothing better. I think everybody would agree that when you've been a part of implementing a change and supporting the coaches in something that's come out so blatantly like that. In this game, Barcelona go from 1-0 down to 2-1 up. Koundé scores another goal, albeit from a set play, and they win the game 2-1. It was a world-class example of that in-game sort of intervention. And we, as a unit, have a responsibility to, one, be able to observe those things and see those things and understand those things, but then be able to tell the story in such a way that everybody from the fan to the pro-licensed coach not only understands, but they find it insightful and engaging.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Paul. That's fantastic. Yeah, so that, I mean, if there's anyone got any questions, obviously leave them below in the video and we'll try and get them to Paul if there's any kind of follow-up questions. But I suppose what we'll move on to next, Paul, is working with elite coaches. Obviously, we've dropped some names already in the fact that you've worked with some top operators throughout your career. So one thing I did want to ask in terms of, it links to learning from coaches and also having the respect and gaining their trust as well. I mean, for you now, I'm sure you're at UEFA, you've been at United, you headed up United department for 12 years. That in itself kind of gives you credibility because you've done that over time. But, you know, for those that are starting out, or even you back in the earlier days, it would have been a different case. So I just wanted to really ask in terms of getting that balance of being open to learn, but also being confident in your own ability as well, because at that level, you're working with coaches that have probably been in the game longer than you've been alive, you know, when you're starting out. So yeah, just in terms of that, being confident, but also learning from the coaches and having that, ability to kind of pick up as much as you can from them. Okay, so if you've made it this far into the video, you must be enjoying the content, either that or you've simply fallen asleep. So whichever one of those it is, you won't mind me asking you for a quick favor. So if you remember right at the start of the video, I did ask you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. So now would be a good time to do that if you haven't got around to it. So the stats are showing only 30% of regular viewers are subscribed. So there's a hell of a lot of people out there that are watching the videos and have not yet got around to hitting that button, but I'll let you off because you can do it right now in just 1 second. So as well as subscribing, if you are enjoying this particular episode, then it would be great if you could give it a thumbs up, even if you also shared it to a friend, let's say, if you think they would also find it useful. And then if you wanted to get involved by starting a discussion or asking a question, you can also leave a comment down below the video on both YouTube or Spotify. So that's enough for the interruption. Let's get back to the conversation.
For me, honestly, it's probably the biggest skill as an analyst, ironically, outside any technical skills. Or I'm going to be a little bit biased because it's me as a character, and my sort of career and history has been sort of that hard work and humility and I guess character and relationships with the coaches. But I massively, massively believe in it. That I think for me, the self-confidence can wait and can take a sort of can be shelved. Yeah. I think, or for me anyway, I always gained self-confidence from knowing that I was able to, one, withstand conversations with the best coaches in the world, but obviously then develop the skill of actually delivering them insight and being a useful resource for them and somebody that could, with respect, enhance them. And I don't mean fundamentally, I just mean going into any game or any single moment where I say or observe something that they go, oh, that's actually really interesting, thanks for that. That's the job satisfaction. But the character part of being relatable, being respected is absolutely imperative. You can be the smartest analyst, you can go through, you can do as much work as you possibly can, but if you don't have that ability and understanding that it's how you deliver your message and the strength of that relationship, that's the vehicle for the insights being delivered, in my opinion. I don't think I've ever changed over the years from day one to now in knowing that the strength of that relationship in that respect is everything. I think we've all seen or experienced ourselves where that relationship isn't 100% and your message doesn't get taken on board, or somebody's message doesn't get given the respect, or sometimes analysts think that their insights or their impact is bigger than it is. Also, that can happen, and it's also understandable, because I think we've all been through in our careers that point where you go, geez, I actually understand this stuff, and I can hold these conversations with these people. But you usually quite quickly witness a conversation, or you're part of a conversation where you sort of get pulled back down to earth at times. And I think everybody goes through that. I think for me, the key skill is having a lot, to be honest, of self-awareness, to be also always measuring where you are and where you sit in the food chain, and knowing that there's always something to work on. It can be tactical understanding, it can be building a relationship to be even stronger. And anytime we've had a change in management at Manchester United, new coaches, even new staff, honestly, I would, if I had to make a choice, I would rather deliver a product that was 70% for 2 months and have a relationship that was 100% for 2 months, rather than the other way around, because the ceiling is always going to be much higher when that relationship is 100%. And I believe that is something that I've been good at, and I've always tried to impart that and make that a real big part of our identity as a department at both clubs, but especially Man United. And it's really important that at Man United, when we've had a new manager and a new coaching staff coming through the door, that we give them the impression that we're just there to support them and help them. And it, honestly, building that, there's nothing more important than building that relationship from the start.
Yeah, it's one of them things. Well, like a lot of things, when you're learning, you're in that kind of pathway of picking up new kind of information. You start to learn, but then you start to learn how much actually that there is still to learn. You know, like as you go through the stages of it. So, in terms of then. You did reference it a little bit there, Paul, in terms of when new managers come in. Was there something that you would do as maybe yourself or as the department when a new head coach came in, because you went through a number of coaches at your time at United? So, like in terms of introducing yourself to the department, what your role is, like just in terms of that initial meeting point with the new coach, really.
Yeah, this developed almost bit by bit as we had sort of changes at United. But I actually vividly remember the Ruben Amorim one, where he came in. I'd already had a conversation with the analyst that was coming in with him, so I had an understanding of how they work. Yeah. And I was mindful of that, because the one thing that you have to be careful of is not overwhelming them with, this is what we do. And everybody's so keen to justify themselves and promote themselves and show how good they are or show how supportive they are. But we created like a departmental presentation to say, here's all the staff members, here's what either their strengths are or what they have been doing. Yeah. However, I almost took the presentation off the screen when I said to Ruben and his staff, but we are flexible to whatever you need. Our job here is to support you. You're the future of our club for however many years. Yeah. And our job is to maximize your skills and your abilities as a coach and everybody else around this table as a coaching staff. And I firmly believe that, yes, we've got to have our own identity and our own ideas and beliefs and everything like that, but we are failing as a department if we're not supporting that coaching staff with their idea. And all they'll do is go more to their analyst or stay within their circle, if you know what I mean. And it's a huge measure of success for me at those clubs in those scenarios, that when you end up building key relationships and they sort of come out of their circle to connect with you. And I think we did a great job of that over the years. The other big thing that I sort of demanded, let's say, or set internally as a department was a challenge, was let's take what, so we had, if you take, especially say Eric Ten Hag, Ruben Amorim, Jose and Louis to a certain degree. But if we think about Eric and Ruben, they were highly successful, to unprecedented success basically within their clubs. So their belief in what they were doing was second to none. We just had to support it. But the challenge I set us as a department was, let's take exactly what they've been getting at their club. Let's understand why it's important to them. Try and figure out if there's any flexibility or adjustments, or if we can sort of shape it in any way. But let's do it better. Yeah. And that was always my challenge for myself and us as a group, was like, take their reports, take their videos, take their ideas, make sure we give them what they want, because that strengthens that trust. And then let's elaborate on it. Can we do it quicker? Can we do it in more detail? Can we, present that video thing in a data format to make it quicker or whatever? That was something that I would set internally.
Yeah, interesting. So this may be a difficult question to answer, because obviously you've worked with a lot of good managers, good head coaches. I'm sure you've picked up a hell of a lot of information from all of them. But because I asked the same question to Tom as well, in terms of was there one of the coaches that you've worked with that maybe challenged you the most, or you felt that maybe you learned the most from? And again, like I said, you've obviously picked up a lot from everyone, but was there one of them in the past that you maybe think of, actually that guy really did challenge me and I did learn a lot from that person?
Yeah, I'm gonna sit on the fence a little bit. There was things about absolutely all of them. I mean, one major point, and honestly, this was a huge kind of mental maturity point, I think, from my side, was when Jose Mourinho came in after Louis van Gaal. We were in a process of delivering this dossier, which you'll be able to see Louis carrying on the touchline up and down Old Trafford. It's quite synonymous with him. But inside that was multiple match reports, multiple bits of supplementary information. But it was like 100 pages for every single game. And we were doing that every 3 or 4 days, European opponents. When Jose came in, he asked to see what we were delivering. And he looked at it and said, he flicked through it, read bits of it and said, this is perfect in terms of the content. However, more or less, I don't want any words. I just want visuals and graphics. This is how I learn. And it was such a sort of light bulb moment for me to go, well, we think about how the players take in information, which is correct to do. But again, if our job is to enable the coach and the coaching staff to their maximum, first of all, we need to make sure that the information that we're giving them is optimal and maximized, let's say. And Jose articulated that in a way of giving us confidence, but challenging us to change how that could be portrayed. I think the second thing I wanted to mention was, I think under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, the coaching staff grew and the responsibility of the coaching staff grew. And that was a huge challenge for me as a head of department, where we now had to facilitate so many different aspects of analysis in a much greater detail, going into and coming back from all the different members of the coaching staff. So they were involved in training and all the normal coaching stuff, but in the afternoon they were working on video, or they were watching the opposition, or they were preparing individual meetings for feedback or whatever it was. And that was a big challenge for us as a department, because how do we service that? And I've said a few times, like, the biggest change that I think we've seen in football is the growth of coaching staffs and the change of how coaches are in terms of their skill set and responsibilities, because now coaches are working on video when they're not on the pitch, basically, more or less, and that they then need analysts to work with them closely to supplement all that work.
Yeah. I mean, that leads to the next question. Just a couple more questions, really, Paul. But in terms of going from all the time you've spent in the club setting, then what do you feel has maybe changed the most? And that could be, perceptions of analysis, like the different roles at the level of detail. Obviously, all of these things will play a factor. But in terms of maybe if you cast your mind back from when you first headed up the Blackburn department, which was 15 years ago or something around that, to when you were at United at the end, like, what kind of things changed the most? But also, do you think maybe what will change in the next 10 years in terms of the analyst position in that industry?
Yeah, loads has changed. I mean, first of all, the it's such a basic one, but the footage situation. Do you know what I mean? I started at Blackburn, we were dealing with broadcast footage only, pretty much. There was no sharing. Everybody was guarded and protective.
Yeah.
The moment that went to, quite quickly, league-wide shares of tactical footage, our job became much easier. There was a lot less admin because we were literally mailing DVDs to other clubs and hoping that you get something back. That's a massive shift. But obviously then with that, you get more time and challenge to then think, how can you impact the coaching process and how can you improve the development of players and teams and performances. So I think I do, like, going back to my last point, I do think the growth of coaching staffs have been the main determining factor in that, because I still think if you've got a small coaching staff, there's only sort of so much work that comes your way in terms of what you have to provide. So that would be, again, with respect to, like, you know, academies and youth football, you've typically got one or two coaches, or some non-league clubs, you've probably only got one or two coaches. So the role of the analyst is a little bit more focused and narrow, let's say. I think in terms of the way it's going, I do still think there's going to be quite a lot of growth within coaching staffs, to be honest. I think we see some clubs with coaches with roles that are extremely specific. And again, they then demand an analyst working with them that also has a very, very specific view of the matches or the players or whatever it might be. And then I think probably the biggest revolution to come will be, and we were very, very close at Man United, and there's still a lot of good work going on there about contextualizing data and bringing data into a coaching language and making sure it withstands, so that the coaches, when they do see a metric or they do see a ranking or whatever it might be, they know they can trust it immediately without thinking, you know, whatever. And I sort of, it's an easy example, but I always use like shots or XG as an example. You sort of, if you think of 12 shots to 6 in a game, you probably build a picture that those 12 shots have meant that there was a lot of attacking organisation dominance and this team's carved them open. But again, those 12 shots could be all from set plays. And it's that next layer of context being readily available and being accepted and understood immediately that I think needs to be there really for the game to keep moving forward.
Yeah. On the point of increased amount, like the coaching staff size, Paul, obviously set piece coach and, you know, throwing coach, etc. What else could you see? Like, would it be things like a transition coach? Would it be like what other things could actually be in the future, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're there. I think we're there with some of these nuances. I mean, anything that you can basically break the game down into a sort of a repeatable action, more or less can warrant a coach or an analyst now. So you go all the way from the top. You've got covering the whole game, but then you've got open play, set play, so set play coach, and they're normally responsible for everything in that segment. But I have heard of an attacking set play coach, a defensive set play coach. You could have an open play throwing coach. You have an allocation of responsibilities still that even within attacking organisation, one coach may be, and I've heard of this, for example, with the goalkeeping coach, where the one coach may be allocated the responsibility of all the first phase actions, where it's build up, it's short build up, it's involving the goalkeeper, it's 11v10, because the context of that situation when we play there is different, not wholly, but different still here and different still here. And I mean, we at United, we had a framework where we had, I don't know, whatever, like 15, 20 different phases of the game that we believed had its own identity and its own conditions. Who's to say that as many of them won't be micromanaged and sort of developed, you know? But it's always this is where we can lose control, and we can try and control everything as much. We can lose control through trying to control as much as we possibly can, but we still have to maintain players' balance, what's actually important. And again, that comes full circle again back to that analyst having a wider understanding of what's important for the players to be able to go out the pitch and perform. And the more you can work with coaching staffs to understand that, and players as well, it's a massive, massive learning one. That.
Yeah, definitely. So I couldn't have you on, Paul, without asking you for some advice for younger, newer analysts. So, and I know times will have changed a lot when you started in terms of the amount of opportunities, the amount of degrees that were out there. And one thing as well, which I will say, is we're seeing more people kind of posting online and sharing work. You were almost like the complete opposite. I mean, up until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, no, you were a ghost online, Paul. So you went the complete opposite. So If you could now speak to 18-year-old Paul in terms of you're starting out in your career and you want to, go on to be an analyst at the top level, knowing what you know now, what would you say? Would you do anything different? And what kind of things, what steps would you take?
I mean, the landscape's changed hugely. I mean, for context, I was so lucky to basically walk into a Premier League club essentially as a number two or the second out of two with next to no interview, next to no application. I was extremely fortunate, but the landscape and the environment allowed it as well, which is completely different these days. I think a lot of the values I still had there at that time stand up now in terms of hard work, perseverance, having self-awareness for me is a huge one. You want to be able to connect with people, but you have to know when it's too much, and you can turn somebody off by being too strong with them, and sort of a bit of a nuisance. You've got to understand that these practitioners, whether it's analysts or coaches, have got a lot of pressure and demands on them, and a lot of people are willing to help people, but you have to. It's quite easy to turn people off by either being too strong-minded or wanting too much or something like that. So I would advise to take a slow but careful approach with people. I'd make specialized targeted questions. There's too often that I receive questions from people on LinkedIn that it just says hi, and I know it's been copy and pasted 100 times, which I admire the effort, but I think sometimes you've got to understand that that blanket approach, putting hi Paul shows effort and shows a degree of intended connection. But yeah, the self-awareness one and the hard work one is extremely important. I don't think you get a substantial role or opportunity without those two things. And then in terms of kind of practically gaining the experience is everything. Honestly, is the market now is so sort of diluted, let's say, for any significant sort of paid roles, where at United we were getting always minimum 200 applicants for any role of any sort of credibility, that you basically have to have experience, whether you've had that in a previous role that you've been paid for, or whether you seek that out. I think when you're starting out, think of the ways that you can create content, like you say, online, or create work for local clubs, or shadowing, things like that. But you really, at United, I mean, obviously we're sort of at the higher end of the food chain. We always had the luxury of being able to demand people had experience for any role. But with that meant that you had to display that you were able to do the job and that you weren't a risk. But with that, again, don't be afraid to show your personality and your commitment and things like that, because again, engaging with players and coaching staff and maximizing that message is very, very important. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I'll just add to that in terms of like the actual networking side of things. It's one of the things which is probably easier said than done in terms of networking, especially when you're starting out and trying to reach, people that are in these roles. But I think it goes as basic as, even if you're at uni, in terms of you're making a good impression with your lecturer, that maybe you've got a work experience through that. Like if you are gaining work experience, you're probably going to come across other analysts when you're playing an opposing team. So just having a good impression and just, effectively it's a people's game. Like you've obviously got to be a good analyst, but to get yourself in the position to have an interview and meet these people, you've got to make a good impression, haven't you?
Yeah, and I'd say honestly, I believe I had two significant examples of that in order to be offered the Manchester United job when I did. One was my relationship with Paul Bonus, who used to work with Prozone. Spent a lot of time with Paul learning the product, and I was like a sponge. I couldn't get enough of him, but in a professional way. So he knew that I was a safe pair of hands in terms of my work rate and commitment and character, because we'd spent hours together in meetings or training or calls or whatever it was. And Prozone being Man United, being a customer of Prozone at that time, Paul was somebody that was central to the industry and respected and had an impression of a lot of analysts from different clubs, that he gave me a good reference in that process. But to the point you made, in the small moments that I had to meet Simon Wells, who was the Manchester United analyst before me, I, not just because it was Man United, but because they were my club, I probably made an even bigger effort. But coming across professional, coming across pleasant, coming across even kind and polite, like basic things, was always on my radar, because you just never know when you're going to need somebody. And everybody with over 10 years experience will now know that they've bumped back into somebody, or they've needed something from someone that maybe in their first meeting that they didn't know. And that, to be honest, I have always been aware of that. I also, it's a little bit of a funny anecdote, but I also got the feedback that I got plus points walking into my interview at Man United because I kept saying thank you for the person in front of me holding the door open. And that got noted. So you just never know when someone's listening and what's important to them. And I knew that those values were important for Manchester United.
Yeah, definitely. So I did want to ask you, Paul, I'm sure there's many, but is there a highlight of your career so far? Anything that really sticks out as a fond memory?
It has to, I mean, in terms of kind of individual moments, it has to be the sort of trophy wins, I think. Like, I grew up as a United fan. It was, I mean, I was living, and I've been so fortunate to sort of achieve my dream job, doing my dream profession at my favorite club.
Yeah.
So that was never lost on me. Then to go and work with some of the people that I did, especially people that I grew up watching and following and supporting, people like Darren Fletcher, Michael Carrick, even sort of Wayne Rooney, Ryan Giggs, people that I got to connect with and establish a professional and sometimes personal, but mainly professional relationship with, was of big value. But then being able to share those experience of winning trophies with Man United with those people when I grew up watching that was incredible. So especially probably the first FA Cup win in 2016 being the first one. But all of them have been special. And to be honest, the ones where you've played more of a part in those wins or been more substantial in the work with the coaching staff, I think from a professional point of view, has given the most job satisfaction, really.
Yeah, nice. Perfect. So to wrap up then, I'm going to link down below, obviously, the articles that we've spoke about, the UEFA.com, the other episodes that we've mentioned, so with Tom, Ewan, and Carl. Is there anything else you want to give a shout out to, Paul? Or also, I also actually ask if there's any book recommendations, podcast recommendations that you have. It doesn't have to be football at this point. You can go wild if there's anything else that you want to shout out.
Yeah, I'm not a big reader, unfortunately. But I had 2 hours on the M60 driving from Burnley to Carrington for the last 12 years. So I became quite a fan of podcasts. I would dip in and out, to be honest. I always enjoyed all the kind of traditional football sort of tactics podcasts and the slightly more serious ones. I enjoyed listening to even back then, the European kind of summarising podcasts, because to get the specialists and journalists from those countries speaking about the sort of the interesting high level summaries of the teams that were playing well in those countries, I thought was quite a smart way of taking in that information. But to be honest, with the load of the job, and I'm sure everybody listening can appreciate this at times, I found myself usually going to like light-hearted football podcasts. So Football Cliches is definitely one of my favourites, and a few other sort of comedy podcasts and things like that when I wasn't making calls in the car.
Yeah, nice. No, listen, Paul, I really, really appreciate your time. We've been going, sort of 90 minutes or so now, so really appreciate that, and it's been very interesting to obviously see all of the screen share as well. Was very useful. So, thanks again. All those links will be down below the video. But other than that, have a good rest of the day and enjoy the rest of the Champions League this season.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks a lot.